All right, how's it going, everyone? This is Anon. Changing the format a little bit. None of this is financial advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. This is just crayon eating Marine who likes looking at stocks. And I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. This is just something that I was kind of deep diving into over the weekend, and I wanted to share basically what I found. So I think this is going to be probably very honest and very open, and people can comment either side. That's totally fine. Um, I've kind of found myself somewhere in the middle with this thing between when I first saw Genius had registered an ATM and then all of a sudden came out with the naked shorting thing. I was obviously skeptical because that's looks very much like they're just using retail to fund their ATM. Now, the deeper I'm diving into it, I mean, I'm kind of finding myself in the middle on this. So you guys can tell me what you think in the comments, but here we go. So, the first thing I kind of wanted to do was kind of go over the chart. We left a gap here, and there was a small gap down here as well. Um, so, obviously, most people know that we took a huge run, and the volume spiked. I mean, I think this day was like 270 million. This was 250 million or something like that. That's a lot of volume on a very, very small float. And let me kind of just cover that right now. So, if you look here, the float is being reported as 10 millions, like 10.73 million, right? That's a very, very small float. That's what we consider a micro float. Now, I found it interesting. I did do some research. I did listen to the conversation with Wes and Roger. And in this timestamp around like 27:11, sometime around there, if you keep listening for the next couple of seconds, I don't know how to make this work on the YouTube thing. I'm not much of a YouTuber, to be honest with you. I usually just do a live stream and answer questions twice a week. But I was going to say, in this particular instance, what I found was he actually said 10 million West did, and then Roger actually corrected him and said, no, the float is only 5 million. Now, I don't know why he would say that if it's not true. Maybe there's more stuff that's locked up by insiders that I didn't see, but from what Wes said was 10 million and he said 5. I don't know. So let's just assume 10.73 million. Let's pretend that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm sure he does, but I just have to be, go on the safe side on this. So let's say the float is 10.73 million, right? The total shares outstanding, I believe, was 24. I think I looked it up, right? One of these. Yeah, it was 24.6 million was the total shares outstanding, and then of that, the float is actually about 10.73. So that's all the shares that are out there for anyone that doesn't, understand this. Your shares outstanding is how many shares were issued out total. And then your float is what's called your free float is basically how many shares are able to be traded that aren't locked up by insiders or, some other groups. So in this case right here, everybody kind of was talking about this, and I've seen a bunch of other YouTubers and people writing DD that were talking about the 7.5 million. But I went through the filings, and I can tell you that they did issue out this PR, this press release. I think it was on the 9th, so it would have been probably this one. No, not this one. Sorry. Apologize for that. One of these was the one where, yeah, it's right here. So here, this is a press release, but this is not the actual filing. So I saw a bunch of people talking about, oh, well, they're just diluting on, that's why the stock dropped. Now, that's actually not true, because if they had this thing registered, it should be in the SEC files, and it's not. So let's see. Did I close it already? But so here we go. So what you would find is this, and this is what I think actually happened. Let's move it instead of a daily. Let's move it to like a 15-minute. So when we gapped up here largely in this day, right? I think this was for two purposes. First, basically, so the people who were in it on the first day. Actually, let me do like a 5 minute, so it kind of makes it a little more. Sorry, my kids are yelling. Okay. So this morning right here, we'll zoom in a little bit. It's not going to look pretty, but what I want to show you is basically when it gapped up, hugely, right? So it gaps up here. This huge gap is left. And what ends up happening is it gets above 517. And why is 517 a key, metric? It is because they actually had notes convertible here there was 3.5 million shares converted, right? So I think what happened was when this thing got over the conversion price, and maybe they were pushing it up for that reason, but they would basically release 3.5 million shares onto the market, which would help obviously anyone that was short on this that came out of nowhere. I think that mixed in with obviously retail taking profit, which is obviously very smart and fine. But this is kind of like, if you think about it, okay, so you add another 3.5 million shares back in. It gave them some liquidity finally, and they were able to push down the stock the rest of the day, right? So you have a gap up here, and you got a gap down here now, and technically you have another gap, I believe, at like 47 cents, I think it was. It doesn't show up on the gap detector for whatever reason, but I do remember if we go back, I believe it's 47 cents. They left a tiny gap there. So the big one, though, is this. So I just wanted to point out what I think happened was they pushed it up so they could unlock those convertibles, and then they basically were able to get some liquidity and push down the stock. Now, what you notice here was this thing, now we don't know this for a fact. And we don't actually have to find out until the quarter when, these guys actually do their filing. But like at this point right now, it kind of makes sense why and that's why the price would have dropped. And a lot of people are confused on, if they have no shares, how could they do this? It's not necessarily just crime. It's more that these guys may have pushed it up to unlock this extra, liquidity up here. Now, that would basically then increase this number 3.5 million. So, if we want to do the math on that, just to be pretty accurate, we'd take the 10.73 plus 3.5, and we'd have around 14.23 million shares. So I just wanted to point that out that, I think that's what happened. I don't know that for a fact, but this makes more sense than a lot of the other stuff I saw, So I wanted to go into this because obviously this company got like kind of just ground into the dirt, right? You can kind of look at their like long-term chart and you can see this thing. Let me get off the 5-minute, but let's go to their, let's go to a 4-hour. You can see, they left all these big gaps up there and then they just got absolutely crushed down here. And this is, I believe, right when they put out the notes convertible. You can see the huge drop, right? And then they've been just kind of chilling in this like sub 1 thing until finally they filed the ATM and then they pushed the stock up. Now, the question is, why? So why do all this, right? So the question is been raised multiple times, and I wanted to bring up, the couple things that I've seen. Obviously, this huge amount of volume here, these huge, 2-day candles right here, including even the day before. Let me get on to the daily. Sorry. A bit disorganized, but I've really been working with my kids all day, and I don't have a ton of time to kind of do all this. But here. So see this, the volume had started picking up back when they made some noise with Wes. And then here you see this massive run and these huge candles, right? So like we're talking about like 270 million and 250 million on a stock that might have roughly 14 million as a float. That's very unusual, is what I can tell you. So going back to why. So what I've seen is, someone on Super Snock, I think he's a mod, right? Badass trader. So I'm giving him credit. He did the research, and that's awesome. So he basically called the guy a grifter, like a pyramid scheme grifter, and, he, ironically puts out this ATM right before. It looks on paper like this is shady. And so I'm not disagreeing with that. Like, the question is he doing it with no evidence backing him up, or was this a company that really was naked shorted, or perhaps, just ground into the dirt by spoofing, which is a legal practice basically where you put in a large sell order, it drives down the price, and then you pull it before it actually hits. So like it just basically can move your company down in chunks. And, at that point, when they know that they can kind of do that, they can drive you into the dirt, especially if you need money. And that's what happens with a lot of these small caps is this thing will go through and they'll go, oh, well, that company's the stock price just keeps falling, and then they have to raise money, and then when they raise money through like an ATM or a direct placement or private placement or like an RDO, what happens is they basically have to issue way more shares, which dilutes the stock more, and so it's this constant like death spiral for these small cap companies. And I think what's happened is people like this guy, Roger, and other CEOs of small firms that are growth stocks that need obviously a constant, infusion of cash. This kills their business, and they basically end up getting delisted half the time because they're constantly trying to, raise money, and they're constantly getting diluted at the worst levels. So I don't know his intentions. I can only speculate, and so I'm gonna go with this. I think that he found out how this works. They did at least look into it. I believe they did hire Share Intel, who's a leader in kind of like looking at this like systemic problem, and he's decided he's going to do something about it. He also, I think, at the same time understands what's going to happen is probably this stock's going to run up, which is why they issued out an ATM. In fact, if I was him, I would have issued out a bigger one. But, this way he's got a full war chest to go to war, and if, his float's so small that even just a small bit of attention and small bit of volume would have probably caused a bunch of FTDs to pile up. Well, now you're getting national attention and you're getting a huge amount of, volume. So, sure, could each trader every 30 minutes be selling in and out? Sure, that could happen, but I find that very unlikely. So, give credit here. This guy has kind of nailed down looking back into his past, and I don't know what to think fully of the CEO. I'm going to go somewhere in between. I do think that there's probably enough evidence because they're making a lot of noise, him and Wes. So by them making a lot of noise, and I've heard people call Wes an ambulance chaser, and I don't know either one of these people well enough to say track records, all this stuff. Wes is a lawyer. He's hired to basically look into it and into, obviously fraudulent things that happen on the market. That's kind of what they do. And so for him, his name being out there is going to bring in more business, which will bring in more money for him. So, this is a win-win for him. He gets a lot of, visibility, and his firm, I'm sure, is doing well. And in this guy's case, he's got a company that's going down, getting beat down. This is a chance for him to raise some capital. At the same time, it doesn't mean that they're wrong, that this isn't a problem with their particular, stock or in general, just all these small caps that are just getting absolutely beat up. And that's something I've been looking into for the last 2 years, is kind of how these small caps work. So this is a lot of information. If you want to, it's on Supersnock. The Baddest Trader wrote it up, and I think it's a good write-up. And so what I can tell you is I think the truth always falls somewhere in between, and that's typical of life. I think that this guy probably has good intentions, but there's also some selfish intentions as well. They're not going to do this if there wasn't a problem, but they're also taking full advantage of it because there's a problem. And that's what I mean by fair and balanced, is because I think that the truth's going to be somewhere in between this and, altruistic, to fix the markets. So he's not going to do it if it didn't benefit their company, and that's the honest truth. So if you guys want to read this is right here. Has anyone actually looked into Roger James? And that's what I think it's labeled as, with Wes Christian. You should check out this article. Here's what's interesting. So if you look at the short interest, right? So if I put on utilization, this is a stock that's chopped around from basically like 100 to nothing, 100 to nothing a bunch of times. It was at nothing and then shot up to 100 again. And it's going to probably stay at 100 for a while because there's not a ton of float. Now, what I started noticing, though, if you put this on for, instead of 3 months, let's put it on 7 days. Look at the short interest spike hugely, right? That's almost 4,000%, within like 7 days, all of a sudden up 800%, free float on loan, 1,400%. Like these are weird numbers that don't really add up. And now, granted, Vortex is imperfect. So here's what I kind of want you to focus in on is let's look at this kind of like last couple of days, right? Into December, into January. Let's look at cost to borrow and see it shoot up through. See shares on loan, shoot up. Free float on loan, shoot up, right? I mean, so the thing I was also interested in was we don't have FTDs yet for this company because there really weren't any until now, and there will be going forward in the future. Because the prime brokers, I can tell you this, they're selling shares out that they probably don't have. I only say that because if you look at the numbers, we don't know how much has been traded, but the stock was sub 1 when a lot of this came out, and people were buying obviously good chunks of it. And the stock shot up, but it's still somewhat reasonably priced compared to a lot of other tickers, which cost a little bit more. So retail still has a lot of buying power down here at this level, even anything sub basically 5. So what I saw was the securities lending volume, though, absolutely spiked. You can see it right there. Like, I mean, security lending went out through the roof. And, like, we're not on the threshold yet, but, like, just the stock doesn't have any options either. So they can't hide the shorts in the options chains yet. We'll see if they introduce options to this. That will obviously change everything. But right now, you're looking at a stock that went from basically no volume at all. Like you're talking about like 100,000 shares traded, 100,000 shares traded, to all of a sudden trading 270 million in a day on a stock that might have maybe 14 million for a float now. But he said 5. Even if you added that 3.5 on and you say 8.5, that's still a small float. Which means that here's what happens. So your broker, when you buy a share from them, right? They give you what you paid for in appearance. They basically go to you and say, okay, well, we'll take your money. Here's your shares. This is the price you get. But that trade is not settled. Usually it's T+2 to settle those trades. And sometimes they can even, if they just choose to fail to deliver because they think the price is going to go down, what they'll do is they'll just eat the FTD and then hold on to it, the FTD until basically you either sell for a loss or even a gain, and then they can settle that trade out. Or what will end up happening is, they can hold on to the FTDs and let them pile up for a while if that broker doesn't have those shares. That's one tactic that they use, and sometimes they just don't have the shares, but yet they'll lend out the shares that they put in your account, and then that's rehypothecation and gets to be really messy. So what I'm pointing out is this thing is pretty, like this volume is significant. Hold on one second. I'm going to go ahead and pause something. My son is clearly upset. Sorry. I'm turning off the baby monitor. Okay. So we've got this issue now here where we have a ton of volume that spiked up. So if there wasn't an FTD or a naked short problem, there's certainly a problem now because that's highly unusual. You would trade that much over, just a span of 2 days on a stock that has almost no float. So you've seen the score shot up from 0 to 67 in basically 1 day. And as we go into next week, as the FTDs, my guess is going to start piling up. It's going to be, I think it's going to be an issue going forward. And so if it wasn't prior, it's going to be one now. All right. So we talked about why the stock dropped. We need to talk about, obviously, this ATM's not filed as of at least Friday. I did check again today. I have not seen any new filings. We can see at market open if there's a new one, but at this point right now, I think they only unlocked the 3.5 convertible notes, and so even that's a drop in the bucket compared to their volume. So the question now is, how much do we trust what's going on here? Like, from a TA standpoint, I would think that they're probably going to hammer down the stock tomorrow, try to shake the tree as much as possible, and they're probably going to try to fill this gap here. Now, there's still that gap down here I told you guys about, but I don't know if we're going to get all the way back down to like whatever it was, 67 cents or whatever it was. Um, I just that'd be a pretty extreme drop, but I do think that this gap right here is on the table. This gap down to 224. So that's on the table for possibly Monday into Tuesday. And then what I think ends up happening is all of a sudden these brokerages that had these massive days, you're going to see them have to figure out either if they're going to FTD or if they fail to deliver, or if they're going to go ahead and start buying some shares that they may not have bought during these 2 days, which may send the stock, further up. This is a stock that I'm not sure what's going to happen to it, because it's getting national attention. So as long as it continues getting some attention, and they're actually holding, I believe, like a CEO conference between a bunch of different like small cap tickers, and it seems like they're kind of like getting into the groove of making sure there's constant news. So is it a pump and dump? I don't know. I was going to say what I think you need to see at this point is what the FTDs decide to do. For me, like I found this pretty early on, so I bought sub 1. So I'm a lot safer than someone that, for example, bought at 5. So you just have to figure out what your risk tolerance is, and then at this point right now, I know most retail can't short it, so you just have to figure out. You obviously can't hedge with options, so you can't be like, I'm going to buy a bunch of shares long and buy some puts just in case to hedge my options. Like that's not an option at this point. I'm sorry for all the options. What I think this is going to do is this. The last time I saw a really, really low liquidity stock that had a whole bunch of volume like this was Spurt. And I know that brings back a lot of bad memories for a lot of people, including myself. Maybe I have to do the new ticker to see if it shows up. But was it here? Yeah, when it ran up to 60. Or was it 80? How did it get? This is the equivalent because they changed the ticker symbol. But this huge spike up here, man, so the stock ran absolutely crazy. And it happened just basically one day. It hugely gapped up and then just, it came back to earth. But I mean, let me see if I can find that just so you can see what ended up happening. That's fine. We can leave that. It was like a just small run up that just went absolutely out of control because of the small. Yeah. So like right here, you saw there was a build up and then there was just this huge gap up and it just squeezed and then it came back down and then it almost came back up again and almost ran again and then it got hammered down and then the merger happened, which I'll be honest with you, I think they tried to bury that merger, but that's another story for another time. But this is a stock that had very low liquidity and then absolutely got on a tear because retail had bought up every option in, I believe it was like they were all in the money and the entire float was locked up just in one strike price on the option chain. So like the gamma ramp on this thing was incredible. I don't think it's going to get that dynamic on GNS because there's no options, but at the same time, there's a good amount of FTDs that are going to probably pile up unless the ATM gets issued into it right away. Now, if they were smart, if GNS was smart, what they do is they would take all this. Wrong ticker. What they would, GNS there. What they would do is they take advantage of this. When the FTD spike, this thing flies up to, fill up maybe, this area again. What you would see is them start, selling money into the ATM and then actually taking out like a huge chunk and not having to dilute that much. That would be the most ideal thing for the company long term. In the short term, obviously, that would slow down momentum. So it all depends on, your risk tolerance, what you want to see with this. But, the question is, are they doing this altruistically? I don't think so. I think the truth is somewhere in between. this, this write-up, which was basically this guy's a grifter, and I think this guy might have basically found a way of being like, okay, this is a win-win. We get ourselves on the map by introducing a bunch of like, you know, good PR for the company. We all of a sudden raise a ton of cash, and we end up trying to fight this good fight, which our company was subjected to. I think that's kind of where I'm falling right now, is that not altruistic. They are obviously taking advantage of the situation in attempts to probably save their company. Now, I don't know why Wes would be on board about, especially with all this attention, and unless there's a case here. So there must be something that they're doing, because if they were just making this all up and just pumping it for like an ATM, you can go to jail for that, for orchestrating pump and dump. So like, I would imagine there's at least some truth to what they're saying. Now we're going to find out. This is what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to push it down, shake the tree as much as possible, and then at some point they're going to have to deal with the FTDs, and it's going to spike back up on a secondary run. I don't know how high that's going to get, but I can tell you at this point right now, these things move really fast. So if you're not going to be sitting behind the computer all day, you probably want to set stop losses. And I know that's a forbidden language in retail's, thing, but you need to protect yourself on something that's this volatile. And I'm just saying that because I know that they can see your orders, but I mean, at this point, unless you're actually actively watching your trading, then I don't know other choice you have. So, you guys tell me what you want me to look more into. I've kind of already gone through the basics. The one thing I did want to point out was cash flow. This company already, before the notes convertible, basically had 2 years worth of cash left, which is much different than Hellbiz or whatever it's called, who is literally issuing out like money right now, and they're going to get diluted on. So that's one I'm telling you right now. Like, I think it's Hellbiz. This is a very high risk. Like, you can see right here, these were the original SPAC warrants, sponsor warrants right here. These aren't the ones you have to worry about. The ones you have to worry about are all these note convertibles at 3 and 2 and 25 cents and 25 cents. Like, was that issued on August, right? So 5 months to be affected, right? So you go back to August, map out 5 months. Oh wait, that's where we are right now. So they're going to be able to dilute on this thing, and they're going to try to pump it, and they're just going to go nowhere, because they'll get some movement because they have to push the stock price up higher. But this is one that I'm not touching personally. They're going to raise cash. That's fine. But I can tell you right now that they're jumping on the bandwagon of GNS. So I don't personally believe them. These guys have a better situation just because of the amount of cash they have left, and they're not burning through that much cash. So, granted, you have to decide if you like their business model or you don't. And if you want to invest in somebody that you're not quite sure of their intentions, these are all things that you have to consider. But I think what I'm trying to do is just present a very, like, at least level, balanced kind of presentation of what I'm seeing on Genius Group. I personally think that's going to go on a secondary run when FTDs hit. That's just my personal opinion. So, I think the jump up to 5 was psychological for a lot of people because they wanted to get up there and unlock those, notes convertible. But I think what ends up happening is they jump up here, and then think about this psychologically, right? So we were down here the first day. It runs up and makes that massive run. Everyone's feeling good, right? Stock ran like 200%. The next morning, they gap up, and it was like up 700%, right? So this stock in 2 days has run up 700%. And what do? They instantly start nailing it. So now you're sitting there watching your thousands of dollars go down. And psychologically, what that does to people, and you keep watching it go down and down and down and down, right? It seems like it's never going to stop. And so you're just watching money disappear. You're like, I wasn't sure about this play anyway. So you sell, you introduce those shares back onto the market. And so this is where it gets super interesting, because there's a lot of psychological games that they understand how retail works. And so think about this. They still finished up at like 329 or something like that, right? Is that where we finished? 329-ish? So we still finished this day at 2:00 something, and then all of a sudden we still finished, at 329. That's a great day in most circumstances, but everyone's just going to remember it being up and then getting pushed down. Well, it must be over, right? So we'll see what ends up happening. You guys give me stuff to look into. Like, I'll do it tomorrow when I'm at work. I just want to find out from you what things you're interested in finding out. I can dig as much as I can. We've got some people in our Discord group that are good at digging, so I just want to see what people are interested in. If everyone wants to present some TA, I've looked into a little bit of it on my own, but I'll present more of that probably tomorrow when I have more time. But I just wanted to cover this right now because I need to get something said. So this is my, I guess, DD for right now. You can go over the shares outstanding, the float, the fact that it's traded 500 million shares in 2 days on a float that's that small is highly abnormal. We know the shares we know the filing that they have out is going to be this one right here, which basically says we have 7.5 million that we're going to issue out for an ATM. Honestly, I thought they should have a bigger one than that. And then we also presented the bad side, which is, Wes and Roger both can have some, questions about their, what they're doing in this particular one. Is this guy 100% altruistic? Probably not. And neither is Wes, is my guess. I mean, he's still a lawyer and he wants to get more clients. And so this is getting his face out in front of everyone as well. So you guys make a decision. Let me know what you want, and then we'll kind of go from there. But this is Anon, and you guys have a great evening, and I will talk to you soon.